Hi everyone, today we're going to talk about eutrophication. It's a term that was thrown around in this chapter 13 quite often. However, eutrophication I don't think was very well explained, so I thought it'd be a good thing to explain. I like the concept of eutrophication in environmental science because it really shows you how living things are interconnected and how one thing can lead to several other things happening, which can lead to degradation in the environment very quickly. So here we're talking about nutrients being released into the environment. Nutrients, as they sound, are things that living things are required to have to grow and to maintain their tissues and things like that. So our food is nutrients. And nutrients that we have as pollution are excessive nutrients, usually from fertilizers and things like that from farms that are actually being run off into our local water bodies. So if you remember the water cycle, we talked about runoff as one of the ways that water can enter through the water cycle after it rains. If the land is not permeable to the water and it can't infiltrate and go into the groundwater system, then it runs off basically into, by gravity, down slope until it hits some standing body of water. So here we have a standing body of water. It's a relatively small lake. We call these oligotrophic lakes. They're not really high in oxygen to begin with, but they do have a healthy kind of ecosystem growing. So imagine this lake here with none of this algae and none of the nutrients entering, just a healthy lake with fish and different plants and a normal ecosystem that's working. If there is runoff bringing in excessive nutrients, say from a local farm that's been using fertilizers, those nutrients were of course meant for the farm and for the plants on the farm to fertilize them. But if there's excess nutrients being pushed into the water system by runoff, then what's happening is those nutrients are now entering this lake, which of course is not where they were meant to be entered in the first place. What happens then? Well, let's see. In this lake we have plants, we have fish and other marine types of organisms normally in there. What happens when the nutrients enter is that small little tiny plants, particularly algae and depending on where you're at, phytoplankton, start to eat these nutrients and they thrive on these nutrients, small dissolved nutrient particles in the water. They actually thrive on them. So these algae begin to grow out of control. They actually grow in a J curve. Remember the population curves? J curves is when everything in your population is perfect. You can start reproducing at high levels and your population numbers can get pretty out of control fast. So here we have the algae growing because they have all kinds of nutrients all of a sudden at a higher level than they normally would in this ecosystem. And what they do is, because of their nature, they grow on the surface of the body of water. They don't really grow equally distributed all through this lake. They grow right here on the surface. So they're growing out of control because they have plenty of food, and now they're growing on the surface. And what happens then is that sunlight, which normally penetrates the layers of the water down to the deeper layers to feed these plants sunlight for photosynthesis, what happens because there's algae here is sunlight is not infiltrating into this water as well as it normally would. So we actually have a die-off of these plants that are the natural photosynthesizers for this environment. Remember, in the process of photosynthesis, plants take in sunlight. They also take in carbon dioxide, which is a natural byproduct of the fish and other things that are living in this water. So they take in sunlight, they take in carbon dioxide, and they produce oxygen, which is critical for this ecosystem because even though fish are underwater, they still require oxygen to breathe through their gills. So now that the algae are blocking, because of the nutrient overgrowth, blocking the sunlight, these photosynthesizers, which remember are the producers for this ecosystem, the first level of the food chain, are going to be dying. And when they die, they decompose. And decomposers start taking over little plants, little fungi, bacteria, and other things in the bottom of this lake will start to break down the plant material and recycle it. Okay, so two things happening here. Number one, we have less carbon dioxide being taken up because there's less plants, they're all dying. We have less oxygen being produced. And then over here, decomposers increase the amount of carbon dioxide being inputted into this lake. So we have a double effect of twice as much carbon dioxide in this water and also a depleted oxygen count. So that leads to a pretty nasty situation. We have lots of algae here, we have lots of death from these plants, and as they're dying, we have a buildup of high levels of carbon dioxide and low levels of oxygen. That leads to other problems here too. Fish are not going to be able to survive for very long in this anoxic environment, so they begin to die as well. Decomposers now are on a J curve. they're going out of control. They have all kinds of plant material, all kinds of organic material from the fish dying, and they also now are on a J curve going out of control. If you remember from population, the thing that happens when something's growing out of control is they have to reach an endpoint. At some point, some limiting factor is going to limit them, and they're going to start dying off at a really rapid level. So here our J curve of algae, they run out of space, they run out of room eventually, or they run out of nutrients, and they start to die. Decomposers get them as well. Decomposers are going on a J curve. Eventually they're going to not to be self-limited by some factor in the environment, and they're going to crash. So basically what we have here is the algae dying, the fish dying, the natural native plants that should be growing on the bottom dying, and then eventually even the decomposers dying, to where we have a completely dead environment, dead of all life, because of excessive nutrients entering this small body of water. So this is a very serious problem. It happens in small bodies of water. We see it all of the time. You can look at your book for pictures of this. You can search Google for this. But this is a documented series of events that happens that brings together a lot of the things that we've been talking about in this class. And I hope this gives you a better insight into what might be going on in eutrophication.